What's going on, guys? We are live on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Facebook. No matter where you're watching, we are happy to have you with us. You can also find us on different podcast networks. I'm Andrew. This is the Game of Inches podcast. We have John Hodge from 3downnation.com. Looking forward to breaking down some CFL. We've talked a lot of soccer, hockey, all kinds of different sports, but it's football season. And no, it's not NFL season. It's not college football season. It's Canadian football season. So look forward to having John on here with us and talking all kinds of CFL info here. John, before we jump into anything, as far as this year goes, I just want to ask how things are over at 3downnation.com and kind of what's new with you guys.
Things are going awesome. Not a whole lot new, I suppose, Andrew. We've got a little bit more of a betting focus this season, as is the case in many places online having to do with the CFL following the legalization of single game sports betting in this wonderful country of ours. But yeah, we got our weekly picks. I'm doing a new series this year called the Offensive Output Report. You know, we had a lot of talk this past offseason about how the CFL is not exciting anymore, and the CFL is, you know, it's not as entertaining as it once was. And I think some of that is legitimate because we did see a down year in 2021 when it came to points, when it came to offensive yards. So I'm actually tracking a number of statistics. And so far after week one, it's a small sample size, but the league, I think, had a great week from an entertainment value perspective. And then, of course, we always got insider talk, power rankings, picks, you name it. Things are going well over at 3Down.
Happy to hear it. I've tweeted a bunch about it. I hope you've seen it. I enjoy the website. And as someone that just as a fan and also as a sports bettor, it's a great place to go. And you mentioned sports betting just kind of being a part of media now. You know, it used to be such a looked down upon thing. And with the legalization in both the United States and now single event betting in Canada, it's part of media. If you're not doing it, if you're not writing about it, you're falling behind. So happy to see you guys doing that as well. And you talk about that report you've been doing. I checked it out, and you know that's kind of my argument, John. I tell people when I have friends still that say, "Well, I can't watch the CFL. I'm a huge NFL guy," and I'm like, "All right, you keep watching your 17-3 Thursday night football game, and I'll watch my 30-27 Thursday night CFL football game." So there's always going to be your doubters, but I think the league is only improving. And again, I want to talk mostly about this year, but I have to talk about kind of all the stuff the league went through prior to the start of the season. I'm sure you've talked about it ad nauseum, but can you tell us a little bit what was going on with the CFLPA and the league itself?
Well, I mean, it was a contentious negotiation, as is typically the case. The negotiation also went not just to the 11th hour, but a little bit beyond it with the postponement of a preseason game. At the end of the day, I think one of the things that's held this league back for a long period of time is not treating the players like true partners. And also teams kind of being islands unto themselves, right? The way the Saskatchewan Roughriders conduct business is completely different from even the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They're both community-owned teams, but they don't share trade secrets. They are not interconnected in the way they do business. And it just gets worse when you get to the privately owned teams. And at the end of the day, a league like the XFL that is centrally owned and owns all the teams, there are advantages from a business perspective to that model. And I think if you're the CFL, to now have revenue sharing, right, to now have transparency between the teams, to share best practices, right, you can probably trim some of the fat in different organizations, right, that maybe existed before with teams not sharing trade secrets, so to speak, or best practices. I think that the CFL now, with revenue sharing coming in, with a long-term agreement with its players, with players getting the opportunity to audit financial statements and actually be true revenue sharing partners as of 2024, getting 25% of the revenue, then going up to 30%. I think that the CFL, for the first time in a very long time, has the proper foundation to be a successful enterprise that actually grows, that does not stagnate, that does not flounder, and doesn't leave specific organizations to struggle, right? It doesn't matter what league you look at. In every single league, there's at least one organization, maybe except for the NFL, that struggles. Anybody who pays attention to hockey knows the Arizona Coyotes are a tire fire, right? That's not to say the NHL is a tire fire, but there are particular franchises who are in peril. Look at the CFL. Ottawa has been a football hotbed now for almost a decade. But if you went back a decade prior to that, the narrative, the conversation was, well, Ottawa, the CFL will never work in Ottawa. They tried it twice. It didn't work, blah, 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 blah. All of a sudden, they're a hotbed of football and have been for almost 10 years. So it's inevitable that a franchise will struggle. But the more that the CFL as a small league can do to help one another, set one another up for success, welcome the players in as partners, I see as a positive thing. And I think they finally, it should have happened 10, 20 years ago. It didn't happen then. Well, they say the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. They finally got it built. The foundation is set correctly. And I think we're going to see growth over the coming years.
Awesome stuff. I'm happy to hear it. And hopefully there's not too much stress now moving forward. Do you think the players are happy? Are they satisfied now with what's taken place?
I mean, I don't think you ever come away from a negotiation of this size completely happy. Neither side should, right? If both sides did, a deal would never get done. But if you're the players, I think you have to be happy. They got the ratification bonus for veterans. The minimum is going up in 2023 and again in 2027. And I think the biggest key in all of this is the players actually get the opt-out. The deal is 5 years hard, but then the players can opt out after that to coincide with the broadcast deal with TSN expiring. So we just saw Apple TV come in and bid big money for the television rights and the broadcasting rights to MLS soccer. If you're the CFL in 5 years from now, right? If all of a sudden, a company like Amazon or a company like Apple or one of those enterprises comes in and puts a big bag of money on the table and says, hey, we want to buy your broadcasting rights worldwide. Well, all of a sudden the players have the opportunity to opt out of the CBA and start a new one fresh with that new fresh broadcasting money rolling in. Does that mean the league is going away from TSN? Absolutely not. It's 5 years from now. Nobody knows what the landscape will look like from a broadcast perspective. But for the players to have advantage of that or be able to take advantage of that, plus the extended health coverage they got, the cap going up, not this year, but a little bit in future years, the players have to be happy. This is the best deal I've ever seen them get in my time covering and following the Canadian Football League.
A few rule changes taking place in the offseason. Not a lot, but a few as far as the game goes. I know a lot of people in my space, in the betting world, thinking these new changes will lead to more points and, more bigger plays and things of that nature. What can you tell us about some of the changes we saw in the offseason?
Well, there are some changes that, let's be honest, are purely there to incentivize offense. After touchdowns and field goals, ensuing kickoffs or possessions are happening a little bit further up the field to benefit the offensive side of the football. The biggest one to me is the hash marks. Anybody who's watched a TSN broadcast has heard about the hash marks a number of times at this point. Essentially, what narrowing the hash marks has done is create a system where the boundary, there's a little more space. The short side of the field has a little more space for receivers to operate. And the field side, the wide side of the field, has become smaller. And the benefit to that is the wide side of the field. I believe off the top of my head, the Canadian Football League field is 63 yards wide. I might be off by a couple, but it's such a wide throw, right? If you're on the left hash mark and you're trying to throw it to your wide out on the right-hand side of the field, all of a sudden you're in a position where even if it's just an 8-yard out, the quarterback's throwing the ball 45 to 50 yards. Yeah. It's not an easy completion to make. It looks easy because it's not physically traveling that far downfield, but if you take out the or you were to change the trajectory of the throw, it's a long bomb. It's not an easy pass to connect on. So by narrowing the hash marks, I think you make life a little bit easier for the receivers on the boundary side, make life a little bit tougher for the defenses, and you make life a little bit easier for your quarterbacks as well to bring in that wide side of the field. I talked to a number of people at the CFL Combine when these rumors were, or these rule changes were simply rumors, and they said, look, the one of the reasons why the wide side of the field is hard to attack in the CFL is that, or one of the reasons that the seams rather are hard to attack in the CFL is the wide side is so wide. You're seeing corners and halfbacks cheating inside because they know if they get beat outside, it's a 50-yard throw. And so they cheat inside to take the seam away. Well, if you have a 4-yard narrower spot to that wide side of the field, defensive backs can't cheat anymore. And if they can't cheat, the seam is going to be easier to expose. And we definitely saw more explosion plays, more long plays, more deep shots this past week, I think, than we had certainly last year in the passing game.
It's funny you mentioned it, how if you're throwing a pass wide, but it only goes 6-7 yards forward, but the QB is bombing the ball. it might not look like they're actually throwing the ball that far. And like you mentioned, at that point, it was going. The travel distance was still far. It just wasn't going forward. So these rules, as much as they're not drastic, I think they're pretty interesting, and it's cool to see how it'll change the game. And of course, not changing the CFL to what it's known to be. And I got to ask you, I mean, three downs. I mean, the website, threedownnation.com. I mean, I like the three downs. It's what's one thing that separates it. Do you ever want that to change? I like the way it is.
Never. No, I think going to four downs would be the biggest mistake the CFL could make, quite frankly. To me, the CFL is the number one football league in the world that plays Canadian football.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that it changes to emulate the NFL, and one could argue that the hash marks emulates the NFL a little bit. But I think that the more that the CFL can stay a unique, different game, the better for it, right? Because if you want to watch four down football on a small field, just watch the NFL. Like there's no reason to watch the Canadian Football League, right? I've used this analogy before, right? If you live in a small town and you're the only sushi joint in town, that's a good position to be in. You shouldn't start serving Italian food just because people seem to like go into the Italian place down the street. Why would you do that? You've already got the sushi market cornered. Just be the best sushi restaurant you can be, and people will come when they want to eat sushi. If they want to eat Italian food, they're still going to go to the nicer place. Why would they come to you, right? You're just the second-rate version of the other restaurant. So the CFL, I think, needs to embrace the three downs, keep the three downs. I think they will. Look, the complaint I hear from NFL purists, and I want it on the record, I'm a big NFL fan myself. I love the four down game, just like I love the three down game. But the complaint I hear from people who love the NFL, don't seem to like the CFL, is, there's too much punting, right? The possessions are too short. Well, I've been at CFL games where a team is down by 3 scores with 5 minutes left. And if you didn't have those 2 and outs and quick punts that some people maybe aren't a fan of, it would be impossible to come back from that, right? In the NFL, you can't come back from 3 scores down with 5 minutes left. In the CFL, you can, right? Because if you score 2 and out, score 2 and out, if you're scoring quickly enough, there is enough time on the clock for anything to happen. And I think that, yes, there are times where offenses are sloppy, right? And it's a long season. It's inevitable you're going to get bad games. I appreciate that sometimes there are too many punts. 16, 18, 20 punts a game is too many. However, you can't have that without also having the excitement that can come at the end of a game from possessions being so short. In fact, we just saw it in week 1, right, at IG Field, where the Winnipeg Blue Bombers forced a 2 and out late, got the ball back with less than 2 minutes left, drove the field and scored, right? We saw a similar situation in Calgary where they came back from being 10 points down in the second half. Not having 3 downs would make those comebacks a harder thing to accomplish. And to me, that's peak excitement, right? When a game can still go either way, even if it's a 10-point, 14-point, 17-point game late, that to me is peak excitement. It's going to keep people viewing in longer, especially from a betting perspective. If they're wanting to see what the final score is going to be, it's going to keep people at the stadium buying concessions, alcohol, food, whatever you want to call it, whatever you want to name it. I think that's the best thing the CFL could do, is sticking with that, because I think that's at the end of the day something that is more exciting from an objective perspective than the NFL.
Great stuff. Yeah, 3 downs, it's a CFL staple. I don't want that to change. I like the way it is. And you talk about the defensive aspect of it. It's great because people, all they want to do is talk about the offense side of things. Anything can happen in a CFL game. There's no team that's really out of it. And how many times you see in an NFL game, prime time, a team has a lead and they protect it like no other. They utilize their running backs. They run the ball into the ground. They kill as much time as they can. And by 6 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, you're turning your TV off and tossing some Netflix on. I mean, it's just, that game is done. It's done. There's no chance. I mean, we could see some great long balls and that kind of stuff, but that's what you'd have to do, to come back in the game. So that's kind of where I'd look. I want to talk about this year, the team this year that, obviously Winnipeg Blue Bombers winning again. That was actually my first ever CFL game, John, was the Grey Cup last year, which was pretty exciting to be at.
Nice.
In Hamilton. That was a lot of fun. The competitiveness of the league. I just want to get your thoughts across the league, Eastern Conference, Western Conference, the competitiveness of it. I just love to see upsets, but not only just that, just close divisions. What can you tell us about the league this year and how competitive it will be?
I think it's going to be extremely competitive. I really do. I think that there's a lot of parity in this league, particularly in the East Division. Let's start there. The Toronto Argonauts are coming back with a very similar squad that won the East Division last year. McLeod Bethel Thompson got up to a great start last year, then went cold. But they've added Andrew Harris. They've added Brandon Banks. They've added Jagera Davis, three of the best aging players in the CFL. If those guys prove they have more gas in the tank, I think Toronto's going to win the division. But that said, I don't see them being more than 3 wins better than any other team in the division. The Ticats, I think, take a bit of a step back, but they're still a very well-coached team. Dane Evans was running for his life in week 1, but I think that offensive line is still pretty good. I think they'll get it figured out. The defense is still tough. You've got the Montreal Alouettes, Vernon Adams Jr. and Trevor Harris, maybe the best 1-2 quarterback combo in the league. William Stanback, it's unfortunate he suffered a broken ankle week 1. He's going to miss, you'd have to figure, the majority of the season at this point, if not the whole thing. But that team is still good. They've got firepower on offense. They've got a good defensive line that's basically just been imported from Edmonton with all those guys who Baron Miles used to coach there. And then, of course, you've got the Ottawa Redblacks, who have, I think they started 13 new players, 13 of 24 new players on the field this past week. And I think 10 of them were on offense. So Jeremiah Masoli threw for 380 yards in Winnipeg at IG Field, had an outstanding performance. Jalen Acklin looked like the real deal. Darvin Adams looks like he's still got some gas in the tank. I think the East Division could be anybody's at this point, to be quite honest. And again, I don't see there being more than a 3-win difference between the top team in the East and the bottom team. I think it's going to be very close. The West, I think at this point, after week 1, it maybe looks like a 4-horse race. With the team obviously being out would be the Edmonton Elks after losing 59-15 week 1 at BC. Nathan Rourke looks sensational. That offense looked really, really good for BC. I'm curious, of course, to see how they'll look without playing Edmonton and playing somebody else.
Right.
But that said, and it's still too early to count Edmonton out. It's only week 1. But my point is, at this point, if you told me that the Grey Cup featured, the top 4 teams in the West, everybody but Edmonton, or any team in the East, I would 100% believe you at this point. I think there's a lot of parity, certainly much more so than we saw last year, where the non-playoff teams were 1 or 2 steps down from everybody else, and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were 1 or 2 steps ahead from the middle of the pack for sure.
I'll start with the East. I got to ask you, because from a betting perspective, that line last week in Winnipeg, Ottawa was all over the place. 9.5, 7, 6.5. This week at some shots, we're now seeing 2.5. It's obviously a home and home. These teams are playing back-to-back weeks here. I'm not going to lie. I didn't think that we'd see change that quickly from the Ottawa roster. And I feel like, I've had a lot of success week 1. I came out profitable week 1 in the CFL, but I feel like every year in week 1 now, I have to just put a bunch of posters up in my house and say, bet the biggest dog. I'll just buy a bunch of huge posters and just hang it around the house, because it seems like every single year in the CFL, that's what happens. The biggest dog cashes. I got to ask you that you mentioned the stats there for Jeremiah Masoli, the big numbers he had, but yet not that many points to show for it. Obviously, there was that one, drop pass that was right in the breadbasket, and there was a lot of different stuff that happened. John, I like the over for this week. In the rematch between these two teams. It's kind of gotten bet up. We're seeing a couple different numbers from 44 to 44.5, 45, 45.5. First of all, what are your thoughts just about Ottawa and how quickly they can be that competitive team? And really just Winnipeg's differences this year from the past 2 years? Because I know there's injuries, but they looked a little different to me in week 1.
Yeah, I think let's start with Ottawa. I think the Red Blacks are the real deal. I think they're well coached. It's kind of a rare circumstance. What often happens in professional football is the roster remains mostly intact and they bring in an all-new coaching staff. What happened in Ottawa this offseason was the opposite. They kept the coaching staff and they brought in almost an entirely new roster worth of players. They started 4 new offensive linemen in week 1. They started 4 new receivers, new quarterback, new running back. The offense is brand new, but we know Paul LaPolice knows how to coach offense when he's got the tools and the weapons at his disposal, which he absolutely does. To me, the only question was how quickly will this team gel? Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? When you go into IG Field and you hold the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to 19 points and you light them up for almost 500 yards of offense, I think you've gelled, right? It's the toughest place to play in the CFL. It's a shame they didn't win that game because, frankly, I was there. They were the better team that night. They absolutely deserved to win that game had it not been for the drop that you highlighted, the time mismanagement at the end of the first half. they win that game, possibly by as many as 10 points. And by the way, you're absolutely right. Bet dogs the first 2 weeks of the CFL season, you'll make money 90% of the time.
Dogs and unders.
Dogs and unders. Dogs and unders. 100%. Dogs and unders is the way to go to start the CFL season. Once the numbers get adjusted and the lines will get better, right, as the season goes on, or at least more accurate, as we kind of get, feel out these teams, and the odds makers can get a better read on just how good these teams are and how well they do or don't match up against one another. I like the over this week, however, with this game, because as we said, a lot of points got left on the field this past week. There were 36 points total. It was the lowest scoring game of week 1. But, the Ottawa Red Blacks, again, they left at least 10 points out on the field. And the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, I think that offense is going to find a new gear. I think the offensive line had a rough game, which is bizarre to say because the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have had the best offensive line in the CFL for the last half decade. That's been their bread and butter. Controlling the line of scrimmage with Andrew Harris pounding the ball. Last season when Harris was out, Brady Oliveira, Johnny Augustine ran the ball almost just as effectively as the future Hall of Fame running back. That didn't happen last week. Ottawa's front seven enveloped that offensive line. So I do think we're going to get more points this week. But am I taking Winnipeg? Heck no. Against the spread, I'm taking Ottawa +3. I took Ottawa against the spread in week 1. I'm taking them against the spread again. The fact that they're getting points at home after outplaying Winnipeg at IG Field, to me, is wild. I would still take Ottawa as a pick-em in this game. I'd happily take them +2.5, +3, whatever you can get. If you get points, take it, run with it.
I love it. And you're a Winnipeg guy, right?
Born and raised in Winnipeg. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So we have our last podcast we did was with a colleague of mine, Jimmy Murphy. He's a Boston Bruins reporter. Jimmy will tell it how it is with the Bruins. So I respect people like you just mentioned. Hey, you take Ottawa at pick'em, and you're a Winnipeg guy. Obviously, there's no bias here. It's all about the money, and I respect it. I'm happy to hear we're on the same page with that over too, because I know it sounds weird to say this, but I really think both teams could have had like a touchdown more in that week 1, maybe even more, like 10 points. Ottawa could have had 10 more points. They leave 3 on the board, like we were talking about before halftime. A lot of different stuff there. Real quick, the Hamilton Tiger Cats offensive line. How much should we worry about it? You said they'll figure it out, but I was actually doing a little bit of a write-up and some video stuff about that game they're playing in week 2. And I used the same thing you said, where Dane Evans running for his life. It's a very cliche football thing to say, but how quickly will he not be running for his life, I guess?
Well, I think we'll see this week. I don't think Calgary's defensive front is as good as Saskatchewan's. That's not to say Calgary's is bad. They just don't have the same caliber of pass rushers as Saskatchewan does. For my money, Saskatchewan has the #1 front seven in the CFL right now. I think there's a couple teams that could challenge that, but Saskatchewan's linebacking core is elite, and the D-line, I think, is very good, despite losing Jonathan Woodard to the NFL and Micah Johnson to the Hamilton Tiger Cats. For me, I think Hamilton is missing Coulter Woodmansee, the former first round pick out of Guelph. He's out right now. He's on the 6-game injured list. They're starting Jesse Gibbon at guard, Alex Fontana at center. Alex Fontana was a former first-round pick, but he sat out all of last season. This is his first action he's seen in a couple of years. And Jesse Gibbon, I believe it started a grand total of 2 games before last week. So they're young, they're fresh, but that said, Hamilton invests along the offensive line in the draft. They have for many, many, many years, going back, taking first-round picks, developing those guys, not rushing them along. Last season, we saw the same script come to play. Hamilton started the season in Winnipeg in week 1. The offensive line struggled. They went to Saskatchewan week 2. The offensive line struggled. By the end of the season, the offensive line figured it out. And so I could see a similar thing taking place. I think the only reason they're struggling right now is because of those injuries. And the depth is there, but the depth is really young. So I think Hamilton got out physicaled in week 1. I think we saw more effort, more desperation from Saskatchewan. But I think Hamilton's offensive line and the protection is going to improve going into week 2. And I don't think we're going to be worrying about about Hamilton's front many weeks from now. I think they're going to get it figured out.
This is a question for people that like to bet on the CFL and just CFL fans in general. Will the Edmonton Elks be the Ottawa Red Blacks of the 2022 season? Tough start for them. Crazy quotes from Chris Jones. I think it'll take some time. Will they be that bet against and that bottom feeder of 2022?
It's looking like it. I mean, coming out of week 1, again, the CFL season last year was a little different, 14 games. Only one bye, if I remember correctly, as well, 15 weeks total. This season, we got 21 weeks of CFL regular season football. Every team's got 3 byes. So this season will be different than last. It is not a sprint. It is more of a marathon. There's more time for teams to develop, more time for teams to change, more time for teams to make alterations to the roster, develop players, bring them along, etc. But you couldn't have a worse start to regular season. You gave up 59 points on the road to a team that missed the playoffs last year and whose quarterback had started a grand total of 2 games, right, in his career. And like the defense looked absolutely atrocious. Offensively, they struggled to get anything going. Nick Arbuckle, I was at the preseason game in Winnipeg where he threw a long touchdown pass against what was essentially Winnipeg's starting defense. And he looked awful in Vancouver. He threw 3 picks. They put Trey Ford in, the rookie out of Waterloo, first round pick in the CFL draft, who was a quarterback since 1980. Well, he threw a pick as well. I'm not sure what they were anticipating from him. I think Trey Ford's going to be a great player in this league, but he's as green as they come coming out of U Sports football. So offensively, it was a failure. Defensively, it was a failure. The special teams were okay. Am I prepared to write Edmonton off yet? No. But if they come out and get smacked at home against Saskatchewan in week 2, it's tough to see them turning it around mid-season or through the course of the season, because if they're starting at that much of a deficit to everybody else from a talent perspective, scheme perspective, whatever you want to call it, I don't see how anybody could expect them to finish anywhere other than last place in the West Division.
I mean, it's a tough team to follow up. Now you're playing a Saskatchewan team so strong defensively. The total is 50.5, spread -7. I like under, but I also like Saskatchewan. So hopefully Saskatchewan and not too much of a blowout fashion here. Really thankful to have you on, John. Before we get you out of here, who's your pick for the East? Who's your pick for the West?
You were talking about Grey Cup here?
Yes, sir.
Oh, boy.
We can have you back on, too, to adjust in the season, too.
Despite their week 1 performance, I'll take the Winnipeg Blue Bombers coming out of the West Division. I just think they've earned the benefit of the doubt at this point. And as much as they didn't play great, they still won. And that's what good teams do. They win when they don't have their A game or even sometimes their B game. And I'll highlight the playoffs last season. Winnipeg turned the ball over, I think it was 6 times in the West Final and won. And they played terribly in the first half of the Grey Cup and won. So I think Winnipeg's earned the benefit of the doubt. I'll put them in the Grey Cup. On the East side, I'll take the Ottawa Red Blacks. Why not? I think Ottawa looked that sharp in week 1. I actually picked them before the season started to go to the Grey Cup, and I didn't see anything week 1 to throw me off that. The defense, I think, looked really polished, and the offense is ahead of where I think people could have reasonably expected them to be with all those new pieces. So I'll call for a Winnipeg-Ottawa Grey Cup, but obviously the CFL is one of the toughest leagues in the world to predict, despite the fact that it's a small league. It's one of the toughest to predict. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to see a Montreal BC Grey Cup. The only thing that would surprise me, I think, at this point is Edmonton representing either division. I don't think we're going to see that.
Montreal, Edmonton. Let's get
throw it back to 2002. Montreal and Edmonton.
Thanks a lot for your time, John. Really appreciate it. John Hodge, 3downnation.com.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Andrew.